The first drop of wine hit the paper at exactly 4:15 in the afternoon. My sister Jessica didn't spill it. She poured it. She stood over my 6-year-old son Jacob, tilting her glass of Pinot Noir with a casual, almost bored precision. Jacob had spent 3 days on that watercolor painting. It was a landscape of the lake outside our parents' cabin, a gift he had been meticulously working on for his grandfather. Now dark red liquid bled across the blue sky, soaking the paper, warping the edges, turning his hard work into a soggy, ruined mess. "He needs to learn that the world doesn't care about his little doodles," Jessica said, her voice slurred but steady. "It's taking up space on the table. And honestly, Jacob needs to toughen up." She finished the glass, set it down on the wet paper with a wet thud, and looked around the room for approval. My Uncle Mark, sitting on the sofa, slapped his knee. "That's a $50 lesson right there, kid. Toughen up or get eaten." The laughter started then. It rippled through the cabin, a sharp, ugly sound. My mother chuckled nervously, desperate to keep the mood light. My cousins smirked. Jacob just froze, staring at the ruin of his painting, his small hands trembling over the table. "Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." I didn't scream. I didn't rush to wipe up the wine. I didn't even breathe for the first few seconds. I just watched my son. Jacob didn't make a sound. His shoulders shook and his face turned a mottled red, but he didn't cry out. He bit his lip until it turned white, physically compressing himself into the chair, trying to make himself small enough to disappear. He wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for invisibility. He was waiting for the laughter to stop, hoping that, if he was quiet enough, the predator would lose interest. And in that silence I saw it. I saw the invisible chain wrapping around his neck. It was the same chain I had worn for 29 years. The chain that taught me to be quiet, to be convenient, to swallow my anger so I didn't disturb the peace. I was watching my son learn the fawn response in real time. He was learning that his pain was a joke to the people who were supposed to love him. He was learning that his job was to smile through the humiliation so the adults wouldn't be uncomfortable. He was learning to be me. The realization hit me like a physical blow, colder than the lake outside. I wasn't just watching him get bullied. I was watching him inherit my trauma. I was passing down a legacy of silence, a genetic predisposition to be a doormat. If I didn't break that chain right now in this exact second, he would carry it for the rest of his life. He would grow up apologizing for taking up space. I looked at my father, David. He was sitting at the head of the table, his hands folded over his empty plate. His face was carved from stone, unreadable to anyone who didn't know him. But I knew him. I saw the way his knuckles had turned white as he gripped his fork. I saw the muscle in his jaw jump. The air in the cabin turned electric heavy with the pressure of things unsaid for decades. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the wood floor, a harsh, grinding sound that cut through the laughter like a knife. I didn't move to clean the mess. I didn't ask for a towel. I walked around the table and stood directly between Jessica and Jacob, using my body as a shield to block her view of him. I didn't look at the wine. I looked at her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to fix anything. I didn't feel the need to smooth over the edges or make a joke to lighten the mood. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a bridge burning down. It wasn't rage, it was accounting. I was done paying the interest on a debt I never owed. "You enjoyed that," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It was flat. Clinical. You enjoyed watching a 6-year-old create something, and you enjoyed destroying it. Jessica rolled her eyes, pouring herself another glass from the bottle on the sideboard, her movements loose and arrogant. "Oh, Sarah, don't be so dramatic. It's paper. I did him a favor. Now he can learn to do something useful instead of making messes." Useful, I repeated, the word tasting like iron in my mouth. The room went dead silent. Jessica's smirk faltered her glass, pausing halfway to her lips. My mother gasped, a sharp intake of air that signaled the beginning of her panic. I didn't blink. I wasn't the sous chef anymore, managing tickets and keeping the kitchen calm during a rush. I was a mother watching a predator, and I was done negotiating. I looked at my father again. He hadn't moved, but his eyes had shifted from the table to me. Before I could say another word, my mother Susan rushed into the scene, but she didn't go to Jacob. She didn't hug the crying child. She grabbed a handful of napkins and started frantically wiping the wine off the table. "Oh, Jessica, you're so clumsy," she chirped, her voice high and tight, vibrating with a desperate manic energy. She was scrubbing the wood, ignoring the ruined painting completely. "Sarah, don't make a face. It was an accident. We can buy him a coloring book. A nice one. With stickers. She looked up at us, her smile stretched too thin, her eyes pleading. Let's just have a nice dinner, please. It's Labor Day. We're family. I watched her, and the pity I usually felt for her evaporated. I realized then that my mother wasn't confused. She wasn't helpless. She was an addict. She was addicted to the illusion of a happy family, and she was willing to pay any price to keep it, but she never paid the price herself. She taxed us. She taxed the good children, the quiet ones, the ones who wouldn't scream. She sacrificed our dignity to appease the monster because Jessica was the only one who threatened to burn the house down. Susan would let Jacob bleed just to keep the carpet clean. Exactly, Jessica said, emboldened by our mother's defense. She leaned back, swirling her wine. He's too soft. Sarah babies him. I'm doing him a favor, teaching him how the real world works. That was it. The snap of the final thread. My father, David, stood up. He didn't do it quickly. He did it with the slow, creaking heaviness of an old building finally giving way. He walked over to the mantel where a rustic wooden sign hung the words "Family is Forever" painted in cursive script. He stared at it for a second, then turned to face Susan. You wiped the table, he said. His voice was dangerously low, a rumble of thunder before the storm. You didn't check on the boy. You worried about the wood stain. Susan froze a wine-soaked napkin in her hand. David, stop being dramatic. I'm just trying to... You're trying to keep the peace, he interrupted. But there is no peace, Susan. There is just silence. And I am done paying for it. He looked down at his left hand. He twisted his gold wedding band. It was tight, buried in the flesh of his finger. He had worn it for 40 years. He walked to the kitchen sink, pumped a dollop of dish soap onto his knuckle, and began to work it off. It was painful to watch. He grimaced, pulling and twisting until the ring slid over the joint with a wet pop. He walked back to the table. He held the ring over the puddle of wine that was still soaking into Jacob's painting. He dropped it. It hit the wet paper with a dull thud, splashing red drops onto the white tablecloth. I am done keeping your peace, he said. And I am done protecting you. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the cabin. My mother stared at the ring sitting in the wine like it was a grenade that had just landed in her lap. Jessica laughed, a sharp, nervous bark of a sound. Dad, are you senile? She scoffed, though her eyes were darting around the room. It's a painting. You're going to divorce Mom over a $5 watercolor set. That is pathetic. David didn't look at her. He didn't look at Mom. He walked over to his travel bag in the corner of the room. He unzipped it and pulled out a thick, black, leather-bound notebook. It looked old, the spine creased, the edges worn. He walked back to the head of the table and set it down with a heavy thud. I have been a structural engineer for 40 years, Jessica, he said, his voice calm, factual, terrifying. My job is to track stress fractures, to find the cracks before the building collapses. I track failures. He opened the book. The pages were filled with his handwriting, neat, precise, meticulous columns of dates and numbers. 3 years ago, he continued, running a finger down the first page, you told me you needed $5,000 for a business loan. You said your influencer career was taking off, but you needed new equipment. Jessica crossed her arms, rolling her eyes. Yeah, and I paid you back, mostly. What is this, an audit? You didn't pay back a dime, David said. But that's not the point. The point is, I started tracking. Not just the big loans. Everything. Every time your mother said she needed extra cash for groceries. Every time she withdrew money for home repairs that never happened. Every time our joint savings account dipped for emergencies. He turned the book around so Jessica and Susan could see the columns. I tracked the dates, I tracked the amounts, and then I hired a forensic accountant to track where the money actually went. Susan made a small, strangled noise. She reached out a hand, trembling. David, please, don't do this. Not in front of everyone. Everyone needs to know, David said. Because everyone has been laughing at Sarah. Everyone has been laughing at Jacob. Everyone thinks they are weak. But they aren't weak. They are the ones paying the bill. He looked at me then, and his eyes were full of a deep, aching apology. I let this happen, Sarah. I let you think you were less than her. I let you think she was special and you were just... there. But I was watching. I was counting. He turned the page. Taped to the paper were bank transfer receipts. This isn't an allowance, Jessica, he said. This is a ransom. David looked down at the ledger, his finger tracing a line of red ink. August 14th, 2 years ago. $12,000. You said it was for a brand partnership buy-in. April 3rd last year. $8,000. You said it was for medical bills. He looked up, meeting Susan's terrified eyes. But the biggest one was 3 years ago, the night of the Labor Day party, the one we didn't attend because you said you were sick, Susan. Susan was shaking her head frantically now, tears streaming down her face. David, stop, please. Protect the name, David's voice rose, cracking with a fury I had never heard. You didn't protect the name, you protected a criminal. He turned the page. This time there wasn't a receipt. There was a copy of a police report taped to the paper. The $174,000 wasn't for business loans, Jessica. It wasn't for gifts. It was hush money. Jessica froze. Her arrogance evaporated, replaced by a sudden, stark terror. She looked at the door, but she didn't move. 3 years ago, David said to the room, Jessica drove home drunk from a party. She hit a parked car, and then she hit a pedestrian, a 19-year-old girl walking her dog. I gasped. The room spun. I remembered that time. Jessica had been traveling for a month. Mom had said she was in Europe finding herself. She didn't stop, David continued. She fled the scene, a hit and run. Susan was sobbing into her hands, her body rocking back and forth. You took our retirement money, David said, his voice shaking. $174,000. You paid for a lawyer to bury it. You paid a settlement to the girl's family to keep it out of civil court. You paid off the car repair shop to fix the dent off the books. You told me it was a parking dispute. You told me it was handled. He slammed the book shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small cabin. You stole our future to cover up her crime. And then you let her sit here at this table and mock a 6-year-old boy for painting a picture. You let her destroy his work because you taught her that destruction has no consequences. He looked at Jessica, who was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. You aren't a businesswoman, Jessica. You aren't an influencer. You are a liability. And your mother is your accomplice. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a family myth dying. Jessica tried to rally. She stood up, smoothing her expensive dress, trying to summon the arrogance that had protected her for 33 years. She looked at the ledger, then at David, and scoffed. So what? She spat. It was an accident. Mom helped me. That's what mothers do. They help, unlike you. She glared at David, her chin high. You're just jealous because Mom loves me more. I don't need your money. I have my own brand. I have my own followers. I don't need this dusty old cabin anyway. David looked at her with a cold, detached pity. It wasn't the look of a father looking at a daughter. It was an engineer looking at a condemned structure. You have nothing, Jessica. He reached into the back pocket of the ledger and pulled out a folded document. He placed it on the table right next to his discarded wedding ring and the ruined painting. This cabin is in my name. It was my inheritance from my father. Your mother's name is not on the deed. He smoothed the paper flat. You have 1 hour to vacate these premises. All of you, Susan included. I am listing it for sale tomorrow morning to recoup the retirement funds you stole. You can't kick us out, Susan wailed, her hands clutching her chest. Where will I go? It's pouring rain. I don't know, David said, his voice devoid of emotion. Maybe you can stay with the daughter you invested so much in. He turned back to Jessica. And regarding your own money, as of 10 minutes ago while you were pouring wine on my grandson's art, I froze the joint accounts. I have reported the transfers as fraud pending a forensic investigation. The bank has locked everything. Your credit cards, Mom's cards, the business account you funnel money through. Jessica pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, frantic. She tapped her banking app. I watched her face crumble. The color drained away, leaving her looking gray and small. It's declined, she whispered. And there it was, the illusion of power of the empty wallet. I watched my sister, the bully, the golden child, the success story shrink before my eyes. Without the financial ivy drip from my parents, her status, her confidence, and her personality evaporated instantly. She wasn't a powerful woman. She was a child in a costume that she hadn't paid for. Her power was never real. It was rented. And the lease was up. Your power was rented, Jessica, David said, echoing my thoughts. And the landlord is closing the building. He walked over to the front door and opened it wide. The storm outside had broken and rain was pouring down in sheets, turning the dirt driveway into mud. The wind howled into the warm cabin. "Get out." Jessica looked at Uncle Mark, who had been laughing earlier. He looked away, suddenly fascinated by the floorboards. She looked at Susan. Susan was just weeping, useless and broken, unable to save anyone, even herself. Finally, Jessica looked at me. Her eyes were wide and wet, filled with a sudden, desperate realization that she was alone. "Sarah," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Tell him he's crazy. You can't let him do this to me. I'm your sister." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had terrorized me for 3 decades. I looked at the wine stain on Jacob's painting. I thought about the silence my son had learned, the silence I was breaking. "You should hurry," I said, my voice as cold as the rain outside. "Traffic is going to be terrible." 6 months later, the light in the new apartment was different. It wasn't the dim yellow light of the cabin or the harsh fluorescent glare of the old family house. It was white and clean, streaming through big windows that overlooked the city park. It was smaller than the house David had shared with Susan for 40 years, but it was peaceful. There was no walking on eggshells here. No heavy sighs from the other room that signaled an incoming guilt trip. No fear of the next explosion. I sat on the floor leaning against the wall, watching them. David was kneeling next to Jacob on a drop cloth. They were covered in sawdust. David was teaching him how to use a miter box to cut wood for a custom canvas frame. "You have to measure twice, Jacob," David said, his voice gentle, patient, the voice of a man who no longer had to shout to be heard. "Precision matters. If the frame is strong, the art is safe." "Like this, Grandpa?" Jacob asked, sawing carefully, his tongue poking out in concentration. "Exactly like that." My mother, Susan, was living in a small condo 2 towns over. She sent letters sometimes, long rambling diatribes written on expensive stationery, blaming us for ruining the family image, for embarrassing her at church, for being cruel. I burned them in the sink without reading past the first line. She was still trying to tax us for a piece that didn't exist, but we had stopped paying. Jessica was working retail at a mall kiosk selling phone cases. The fraud investigation had triggered a tax audit, and she was drowning in legal fees. She had to sell her car. She had to move into a studio apartment. For the first time in 33 years, she was facing the reality of a life without a safety net, and the fall had been hard. I looked at my son. He wasn't flinching anymore. He wasn't hiding under the table. He was making a mess with glue and wood, and he was laughing. When he spilled a little wood glue on the floor, he didn't freeze. He just grabbed a rag and wiped it up, knowing that no one was going to scream at him. I realized then that the price of this peace had been high. We had to break the family to save the people. We had to burn down the structure to save the foundation. It was a heavy cost, but looking at my father's relaxed shoulders, looking at my son's easy, unburdened smile, it was the best bargain I ever made. If you've ever had to break a bond to save yourself, type freedom in the comments. Let's remind each other that we made the right choice.